Hello, I'm going to keep this intro short because this turned out to be a very long video. The title says it all. This is the first video in a series about the Moog Matriarch's wonderful delay module. I barely scratched the surface of the delay and its capabilities in this video. I spent a lot of time on theory and examining the behavior of delay time, range, and the sonic characteristics of the delay. I added my For Synth Nerds Only label to this one, and that's for good reason. It gets really nerdy. A lot of time spent on really small details. In the next few videos, I'll spend more time on practical applications and patches, but I think it's really important to understand what's going on if you want to improve, so that explains why this video is so long and dry. There are some patches and walkthroughs at the end of the video, so if you want to skip all the theory, you can find those sections in the index in the description. Before we get to it, here's a little teaser of some of the sounds I explore in the video. Okay, let's do a quick overview of the Matriarch's delay module and audio signal path. The delay module has a time control, which controls the delay time, a feedback amount knob. Another obvious one controls the amount of feedback or number of repeats. Some delays call this regeneration or intensity. We have a spacing knob. We'll get more into this later, but this works the same as the spacing knob on the filter. I did a filter deep dive a while back, so maybe you're already familiar with this concept. But anyway, it controls the delay time of delay 1 relative to the position of the delay time knob. Again, we'll go into more detail later to make sure this is clear. We have CV inputs for delay time 1 and 2, for feedback amount, for mix amount. This is labeled a bit confusing. It says mix in, but it's a CV input to control the balance of wet and dry, not an audio input. We also have audio inputs for delay 1 and 2. At the bottom, we have a button that either syncs the delay time to the arpeggiator or sequencer, or can also act as a tap tempo button. We have a button for ping pong mode, which is another common enough term for delay, but it essentially flips the delay from right to left. Again, more on that later too. Lastly, we have a mix knob. This controls the balance of wet and dry signal. On the back, we have even more to work with. We have two outputs for delay 1 and 2. These outs are full wet. That's important to remember. We also have another sync input, so we don't necessarily need to sync our delay to the arpeggiator if we don't want to. And lastly, we have a second feedback amount CV input, which controls the amount of feedback for delay channel 2. Okay, overview complete. But now that we're looking at the back of the Matriarch, you may have noticed something else. There's no VCA outs anywhere. On the front panel, the VCA has 2 CV inputs and 2 audio inputs, but no outs. So we need to take a look at the Matriarch's audio path. We start with the oscillators. Could be triangle, saw, or pulse waves. The output of the oscillators are all sent to the mixer, unless of course you patch it differently, but let's stick to the internal routing of the Matriarch for now. The filter has 2 channels, which can be ordered in 3 different ways by the mode switch. They can be in series, a high pass then a low pass. Parallel, in which case the mono output of the mixer is malted and sent to each filter channel. Or a double low pass filter in stereo. So let's stick with the stereo for now. We're going to 2 different VCAs. Out of the VCAs, we're going to delay channel 1 and 2 in. Now, out of the delay, we go to the instrument outs or headphone outs or Eurorack outs to our speakers, amp or computer or interface, whatever you're using to listen to the Matriarch. Okay, but what about the mix knob? So, the signal is actually split after the VCAs and sent to the mix knob. The mix knob then controls the balance or amount of dry signal from our VCAs going to the instrument outs and the wet signal from the delay. It's important to remember that delay is after the VCA, even though on the actual synth the delay module is before the VCAs. If it wasn't, the delay would just be a drone. The VCAs control the volume or length of the note. But remember, there's no VCA outs. We have instrument outs and Eurorack outs, which are the same as the instrument outs but at Eurorack volume levels, and the headphone outs, but they are all after the delay. So we're going to come back to that later as well. Alright, so I want this series to be a true deep dive into the Matriarch's delay module, so we're going to start right at the beginning. Let's examine the delay time knob on the Matriarch. This is probably overkill. I'm sure most of you already understand the concept of delay time, but there's a few interesting things we can discover if we go deep. So I'm going to start by setting up a real simple plucky patch with 1 oscillator. If you want to follow along, I guess I'll just quickly go through what I just set up. Oscillator 1 is set to its highest octave and is a square wave. I've got it turned up on the verge of saturation in the mixer at around 11 o'clock. The filter is in stereo low pass mode. The cutoff is just below 250 Hz. No resonance on either filter. I've got filter spacing slightly offset. Keyboard tracking is fully clockwise and envelope filter modulation is pretty high, close to around the 3 o'clock point. The filter and envelope amp generators are fairly similar, both with attack at 0 and sustain at 0, but decay and release are slightly higher on the amp envelope generator. The VCA mode is set to amp envelope, and I'm using unison mode or one voice mode in the paraphony section. The delay mix is set at 0, feedback is at 0, time is at its fastest, fully counterclockwise, and spacing is at 0, which is the center position because spacing is bipolar. Okay, before we even get into delay time analysis, I want to show you something. Analog delays, unlike digital, can have a very different frequency response, so let's have a look at that. So I'll turn delay mix to the halfway point, which is about 50-50 wet dry, and I'll turn delay time to its max so it's easy to hear the delay itself. So as I'm going higher, the delay is getting quieter, and now it's pretty much gone. So let's go to full wet. Yeah, and you can see up around G, I guess that's G3, there's almost no delay, or is no delay. So C3 seems to be about where it starts to get really quiet. Okay, let's set up a simple arpeggiated patch just to experiment with this. And I'll put it to full wet so we can hear the notes get quieter as they get higher. So the delay is not able to reproduce the pitches above F3 with the oscillator at its highest octave. But why not use this to our advantage and make a patch that ducks the delay on the top notes? Sort of like pushing a bypass on a guitar pedal when you're playing high notes. So just crank up the feedback, adjust the envelopes a little bit, and bring the cutoff down, and voila. If you've read the manual, you know there's a global function for delay filter brightness, so let's check that out. The default is actually bright, so our range is going to decrease if we use the dark filter. Let's go to full wet so we can hear where it cuts out. Oh, basically it's C it's cutting out now. Let's play around a bit and crank up the feedback. Since the delay can't reproduce those high notes, we can really crank the filter pretty much past the point of self-oscillation, and it's going to fade out naturally before the low notes re-trigger. Let's put it back in bright mode. By the way, if you only hit a modifier key once, the Matriarch stays in global settings mode and you can change the settings in real time. Back to dark. And now I'll be quiet so we can actually have a good listen to this. And bright. I like bright mode better for this patch, more of a shimmer. And if I hit D again, we leave global settings. Cool. I really like that sound, and it's a nice simple patch. It's a neat way to take advantage of the limited frequency range of analog delay, but also an important thing to remember, especially if you have a patch where you're playing a bunch of high notes, you're not going to get much delay up there. Okay, now let's take a closer look at delay time. With the time knob fully counterclockwise, the delay time is at its fastest. And again, if you're used to digital delays or plugins, which can go down in some cases to as low as 1 millisecond or even 0, analog delays are usually a little slower. I've got the delay mix knob at 0, so fully dry. The Matriarch's instrument outs are going to one channel in my DAW, and I've got the delay outs of the Matriarch. Remember, those are fully wet regardless of mix knob position, going to another channel so we can easily see the delay times. That was pretty fast, but still audible. Most of us can hear delay time as short as 20 milliseconds, so this is probably longer than that. Let's take a look in the DAW. The top track is the dry Matriarch signal. I'm just going to use the transient detector to find when it starts. Okay, and I'll do the same thing with the delay, which is on the bottom channel here. Oops, transient detector's a little off. They usually are, actually. And let's see, our delay time is about 42 milliseconds. Okay, let's do the same thing with the longest delay time. So with our delay time at its max, it looks like we're pretty close to 400 milliseconds. So the delay times we're getting are a little different from the manual. I'm close enough on the fastest time, only 5 milliseconds off. Part of that 5 milliseconds could be an error due to where I thought the note and delay started when measuring, but the long delay time is about half of what the manual says. But we'll get into that later. Moog is being a little tricky here. This is one of those read the fine print type things, although they didn't bother to print any fine print. Okay, one more thing we should look at is the character of the delay. The Matrix delay is beautiful. It's the original reason why I bought this synth. Again, unlike digital delay, analog delays have their own character, and the Matrix delay is warm and dark, even on the bright setting, as we heard. If we take a look at the waveform, you can see that it has a much softer attack compared to the dry oscillator. Let's listen to the full wet sound and compare it to the dry. And let's hear dry. So the delay is softer and warmer. It's got a gentler attack than the dry sound. One of my favorite things to do on the Matriarch is just to make patches with the delay on full wet. It's such a unique Matriarch type sound. In fact, we're going to do a bunch of those later in the series. Okay, and might as well fully geek out and compare to the dark mode again. Okay, let's try to get some longer delay times. There was some fine print in the delay time section of the manual. It wasn't the missing fine print I mentioned earlier, but it does suggest a way to get longer delay times. Okay, put it back in the bright mode, and we'll put the mix knob to about the halfway point and get our arpeggiator going again and turn the delay all the way to the slowest time. So like we said before, that's around 400 milliseconds. And one of the ways we can get a longer delay time is using this attenuator, which also is a DC offset if nothing's patched into the input, and patch that into the delay time. And, well, there we go. Wow, that sounds super cool. I really love the sound of the Matriarch's delay when it's pushed to extremes. It has a lovely lo-fi metallic sound. We've obviously got a much longer delay time than 400 milliseconds now. And just to compare again, we might as well go into dark mode. And again, I prefer bright mode for this. Okay, but let's check out our delay times now. Alright, first thing you probably noticed, besides the delay time being way longer, is that the left and right delay times are now different. They're not supposed to be. Delay 1 is normal to delay 2, so we're supposed to get the same times, but we're not. Spacing is at 0, maybe it's a little off, and that could be explaining the disparity. We'll take a closer look at that in a minute, but for now let's see how long this delay is. Okay, both are over a second. Alright, but let's take a break from the nerdy stuff for a minute and turn this into something a little more musical. Don't really have to do much, just gonna play around with the filter a little bit and the envelopes. Gonna turn up the mix a little bit, more wet sound. I want there to be a distinction between the dry and the wet. There obviously is going to be because of the character of the delay, but I want them to blend. Sounds pretty good. To add in some pulse width modulation, just using the sine wave from the mod bay. And almost there, I think a little more tinkering with the envelope generator. Want a little bit more pluck from my filter, but a little more decay from the amp. Okay, that sounds pretty good. Let's play. Okay, let's get back to our synth nerd work and try to figure out what's going on with our delay time with an applied offset. We're definitely getting different delay times from each side. I've got the spacing at 0, so theoretically, even though I have the offset patched into delay time 1, remember the CV inputs for delay times are normaled from 1 to 2. So if nothing is patched into delay time 2, we should be getting the same delay times. So something's definitely up. So let's see what happens if I patch into both of them. I'll mult the output of the offset and send to both inputs just to check to see if something is up with the normaled connection. No, we're getting the same result, so the internal connection is working as it should. Alright, I've got delay 2 patched into the left side and 1 into the right side. I know that's probably backwards for most people, but I just patched the delay outs on the back of the Matriarch directly to my interface so we can see the delay separate from the dry signal, and wanted the delay channel 2 to be on top. That way it'll be more clear when we're looking at spacing. So that's what's going on for now. Anyway, you can see the delay times are still the same. So let's try patching a dead patch into delay 2. Should move the left side delay. So again, everything's behaving like it should. Delay 2 is now back to around 400 milliseconds, ignoring the DC offset and reacting only to the delay time knob position. So there's definitely something up with delay time 1. Without the dead patch and with spacing at 0, with a DC offset applied to both time inputs, they are supposed to be the same delay times. I actually like that they're different, made the last patch more interesting, but still, let's see if we can get the delay time up to the same length as delay 2. So we better take a quick look at the spacing knob. The spacing knob on the delay works the same as the spacing knob on the filter, so if you're comfortable with that, you're probably fine with the one on the delay, but let's take a look at it anyway. Think of it like this. The delay time knob controls the time of delay channel 2. The spacing knob is a bipolar offset, which means it's capable of generating both a positive and negative offset of the delay time for channel 1 relative to channel 2. So if the spacing is at 0 or 12 o'clock, that means there's no offset applied, so the delay time should be identical on both channels. If the spacing knob is turned clockwise, the delay time of channel 1 receives a positive offset relative to channel 2, so it's going to be a longer delay time for channel 1. That also may be backwards or counterintuitive for some people. On my Space Echo, for instance, turning delay time clockwise results in faster delay times. So on the Matriarch, remember, turning the delay time or spacing knob up or clockwise doesn't mean faster. In this case, it means slower. Something to remember when you're modulating delay time: a positive offset equals longer delay times. Okay, so the opposite, of course, is true. Turning the spacing knob counterclockwise sends a negative offset, which results in faster delay times of channel 1 relative to channel 2. Okay, let's put that theory to the test and try this out. I've got spacing at 0 and delay time at its max, fully counterclockwise. Oh, it didn't sound like spacing was fully centered, but it's close enough for this. So we should be getting around 400 milliseconds for both. Yep, and that's what we got. So far, so good. Remember, this is not the most accurate way to measure delay time, so as long as we're within 5 or 10 milliseconds, I think we're okay. Okay, let's move spacing fully counterclockwise. So we're applying a negative offset. And the big question is the offset big enough to bring the delay time of channel 1 back to 40 milliseconds? It sounded good. Let's take a look. So delay channel 2 is still at its max, 400 milliseconds, so that's great. It's bang on this time. And for channel 1, let's check it out. Looks like we're getting 44 milliseconds. So that's pretty much bang on as well. That's also great news. It means the offset is big enough that with the delay channel 2 at its max, we can bring delay channel 1 all the way back to the fastest time. That's great. Okay, let's bring delay time down to its fastest speed and apply a positive offset with spacing. And looks good. It's working as expected, so now we're getting the fastest possible delay time, 40 milliseconds from channel 2, and 400 milliseconds, hopefully, from channel 1. Let's check that out. 393, close enough. Okay, let's see what happens if we leave delay time at its fastest, but apply a negative offset with spacing. Okay. Yeah, you can see that. So it's 40 milliseconds for both of them. I was kind of wishful thinking that we could speed up the delay time with spacing, but 40 milliseconds is the fastest it can go. And just so you know, that's the same even if you apply a DC offset. 40 milliseconds is the absolute max. Okay, last one, delay at its max and spacing at its max. Aha! So, channel 2 is at 400 milliseconds, but check out channel 1. We're all the way at 753 milliseconds. So, that's where Moog gets its possible 780 millisecond delay time that's printed in the manual. They don't mention that you can only get that from one channel, unless, of course, you apply an external CV offset. So that's a little tricky on their part. It's not possible without patching to get a stereo delay time over 400 milliseconds. If you want delay times over 400 milliseconds, the options are patch in an offset, or go with delay time at its max and spacing clockwise past the center position. But you'd need to patch a dead patch into the input for delay 2, otherwise you'll get a 400 millisecond delay from one channel and a longer delay time from the other. It means the delay is going to be in mono, but it is possible, like they say in the manual, they just left out that it won't be stereo. Alright, we've been nerding out a lot in this video, so really I guess there's no sense in turning back now. I've got a DC offset patched into the delay time input for channel 1, so we're at its absolute max longest delay time. So I'm just trying to figure out where the spacing dial should be in order for both delays to be in time together. So again, if it's at its max, delay channel 1 will be longer than 2. So I don't want that. I want them to be in time. So back it off a little bit. That's pretty close. Okay, I'm going to call it there. Yeah, that's around 4 o'clock. Okay, well, we've certainly done enough geeking out in this video. I'm guessing I've lost almost all viewers by this point. But we're going to continue on now with some patch ideas. Okay, at the beginning of the video, I demonstrated a real simple patch that ducked the delay by taking advantage of the fact that the Matriarch's delay is not capable of reproducing high pitches. But what if you wanted to do that with lower notes? So that's what we're going to try to do now. Again, I'm going to start with a real simple patch, one square wave oscillator, just at the point of saturation in the mixer around 11 o'clock. The manual says that happens at 12 or halfway, but I hear it around 11. Filter is in stereo low pass mode. Filter cutoff is just above 200 Hertz or around 11 o'clock. Envelope modulation amount is around 3. Filter key tracking is on full and there's no resonance. I've got a short plucky envelope from both the filter and amp envelope generators. And I'll play the same sequence I did in the beginning of the video, but down a few octaves. And let's add some delay. I'm going for an 1/8 note delay. Could just hit the sync button, but we're going to talk about that in the next video. I actually prefer the sound of the delay when it's not in sync mode. There is a tonal difference. Again, we'll talk about that next time. Okay, got my 1/8 notes. Just going to dial in some feedback. Sounds good. Okay, so the plan is to try to get the delay to only affect the bottom pitches. Okay, so I'm going to patch the pitch CV out of the arpeggiator into an attenuverter, and I'm using a tip-top mult cable so we can also patch this into the scope so we can see what's going on. And out of the attenuverter, we'll go into the delay mix CV input. And I'll turn the delay mix all the way down to start. And let's start up the sequence. So on the scope, you can see the pitch CV from the arpeggiator. As the pitch rises in frequency, so does the CV. Well, of course it does. But that poses a problem for our modulation. So let's turn up the attenuverter to bring in the modulation. It looks like I'm going to have to bring the mix knob up a little bit as well. The pitch CV from the arpeggiator isn't high enough voltage to turn the delay mix up that far, at least with the current pitches, so I'll treat the mix knob as an offset. But as you hear, it's doing the opposite of what I want. The delay is only affecting the high notes. It's actually pretty cool, and I think I kind of prefer it like this, but that wasn't our plan. So, need to change a few things. I'm going to patch the pitch CV into the top attenuator on the left, and I'll leave the output unpatched and patch out of the output of the bottom attenuverter. Those two attenuators or attenuverters are normaled if nothing is patched into the input of the second. And patched this way, they work as an attenuverter with an offset. Pretty cool. And I inverted the pitch CV with the top attenuverter. So on the scope, oh, well, it looks like we're going to have to wait a minute for the scope to reset. Anyway, the pitch CV from the arpeggiator is in red, and the output of the attenuators is in yellow, or maybe it's green. I'm not sure, I'm colorblind. Anyway, it'll be the descending CV. And you can hear now the delay is doing what we wanted it to do, ducking the high notes. And now we can use the bottom attenuator as an offset. So you can use it sort of to tune where the delay mix will cut in and out. And the scope hasn't reset yet, but you can hear, oh, there's the scope. You can see the CV is much higher now, so we can set our mix knob lower. And obviously the delay is coming in on lower and lower notes. That's about right there. With this sequence, all I need is a little offset, but if I had a sequence with lower notes, I could crank up the offset, which would really raise the voltage. In this case, it's just going to keep the delay mix mostly wet. But if you want to do this with a lower sequence, that's how you do it. Or if you just want to try different sounds, you can do that. Okay, so that worked, so let's go a little bit further. I'm going to mult the output of the bottom attenuator and patch back into the mix input. I'm also going to modulate the feedback. And like we did with the mix knob, we set the base point of feedback with the feedback knob. That's pretty cool, but I think there's a little too much feedback modulation going on. So I'm going to take the pitch out of the arpeggiator, mult it, and patch it back into the attenuator to keep the delay mix modulation going. And then I'm just going to patch directly out of the mult into the feedback CV input. So it's not getting an offset. So our feedback is now being modulated directly by the arpeggiator, the red trace on the scope. And I think that's working great. I like the sound of that. We could make it more dramatic if we just turned up the feedback. That's cool. I like that little burst of feedback at the low pitch. Neat. Okay, let's compare that to the offset CV again. Ooh, the saturation and the delay is really cool, but it's a little over the top for this patch. Okay, sounds pretty cool, but I think I liked it better when the delay mix was turned up as the pitch rises. So we don't need to invert the pitch CV from the arpeggiator, so we're going to turn the attenuator fully clockwise. So at the moment it's not attenuating anything, but the offset is still working from the bottom attenuator. All right, we can use the CV from the arpeggiator to modulate the offset from our second attenuator by patching it into the CV control in. So let's give that a go. So I haven't looked at the manual in a while, but I think the offset's plus 10 volts. So we're going to get a much more dramatic range, and you can see that on the scope now. That's really cool. Okay, let's just play with the feedback amount a little bit. Oh, that's so cool. Let's try a little more subtle. Yeah, that's neat. Let's see what happens if we modulate the feedback amount with our offset CV. Nice. Okay, I think that sounds really cool. I like that. So let's go a little bit further and let's try modulating the delay time now. I'm going to use the Modbay LFO for this, patch it into the attenuator and into the time input for channel 2, which means it's only going to affect the delay time for channel 2. I'm just modulating channel 2 because I'm going to go for something subtle. Oh, that's definitely not subtle. I want to try to get kind of a chorusy effect, so I'm going to switch over to slewed random wave. And I might as well modulate a little bit of the pulse width with the mod bay as well. And let's try to find... That's cool. Cool, you can just hear subtle... There it is. Subtle changes in the delay. Nice. Okay, let's flip it into ping pong mode. Now the delay bounces from left to right. It's pretty subtle though, so I'm just going to tinker a little bit to try to bring that out a little bit more. If I speed it up a bit, it'll be easier to hear. There we go. Okay, a little earlier in the video I mentioned I prefer the sound of the Matriarch's delay when it's not synced to the arpeggiator. I'll show you why. But first let's get rid of the time modulation, and now sync it to the arpeggiator. Now if you're listening on headphones or a good set of speakers, you probably notice there's a pretty big change in the stereo image. We're going to talk about that in the next video, but first I want to show you something cool. We're going to modulate the time while it's synced to the arpeggiator. And you get these cool glitches. Awesome. Now we're getting kind of random results. It's obvious because we're modulating it with a random slewed wave. So let's see what happens if we modulate the time with the pitch CV from the arpeggiator. And now you can hear we're getting a repeated pattern from our delay modulation. That's really cool. And I bet if you're patient and monkeyed around with the attenuators, you could probably get the delay time to modulate and stay in the same key as your sequence. But I'm not going to worry about that right now. I'm just going to have some fun. And remember, if we invert the pitch CV, the delay time will be modulated faster, so the pitch will rise. Cool. Okay, I hope those are some ideas you can mess around with and have some fun, but let's try something else. So we don't necessarily need to use the sequencer to do this. We could use the keyboard as well. So going into global settings, A#2 and C#0 is ARP. Sequence CV mirrors the keyboard. I'm just doing this so I don't have to repatch anything. So let's try this out. So the keyboard range now controls the amount of delay as well as the amount of feedback. Higher pitches will cause more delay and more feedback. If I wanted the opposite, I could invert the CV with the attenuverter just like I did with the sequencer earlier on. And I'm going to set up a quick paraphonic 4-voice patch here. For now, I'm just going to keep all the voices in the same octave and I'll leave them all as pulse waves. But I am going to make some adjustments to the filter and the envelopes. I'm going to start with adjusting the filter key tracking a little bit, bringing it down to about halfway. And I want my filter envelope to still be pretty punchy, but I want a little bit longer decay in the amp envelope. And lastly, let's add some resonance to the filter. There we go. Oh, and I've still got the delay sync to the arpeggiator. That'll work fine, but that's not the sound I'm going for this. And neither is that, so I'm going to replace the pitch CV that's modulating the time with, go back to the slewed random wave, and still have to attenuate it a bit. And let's put it back into just modulating channel 2, so it's a little more subtle. There we go. That's what I'm after. Okay, that works great. So you can use the keyboard just as well as the arpeggiator to modulate the delay. But since I mentioned it earlier, all I've been thinking about is trying to get the delay to modulate in the same key as the sequencer or arpeggiator. So I'm going to go back into monophonic mode, just going to, for fun, tune one of the oscillators up a fifth. That's good. Okay, and we'll get the arpeggiator going, and this is going to work best with perfect intervals like fourths or fifths or octaves. So to make life easier, I've just got the arpeggiator set to 2 octaves. I want this to be punchier, so I'm just going to make some adjustments with the envelope generators. Cool. Okay, so far so good. So now let's try modulating that delay time. So I'm going to start with the pitch CV. Maybe I'll try the offset and attenuated pitch first. So we're getting a tone down or a minor 7th. Let's try using just the straight pitch CV. Okay, that's a little better. Now let's sync it. And there we've got an octave and a fifth. Let's see if it key tracks. Yeah, it's pretty close. On the F, we're hearing that minor 7th and the 5th a little clearer than we are on the C, but that's pretty cool. And I bet you it'll work better if I modulate channel 1 instead of channel 2. Yeah, okay, it's no modulation. Let's patch it into channel 1. Now we're hearing that 7 and the 5th. From both pitches. Awesome. This is working out great. Okay, that'll about do it for this patch. I got one more patch for you in this marathon of a video. So let's move on to the next one. Okay, I've been talking a lot in this video, so I'm just going to do a demo and play around with this patch for a bit before I do the walkthrough. Okay, so as you heard, this patch is a pad with a ton of modulation. There's even some cross modulation happening. It also works great, as you just saw, in arpeggiator mode. With all that modulation, it's pretty much a semi-random generative patch. Pretty cool. But the real key to this one is the overall tone, a very unique Matriarch sound which comes from using a full wet signal from the delay. Okay, we'll start with the oscillators. You're going to use pulse waves for each of them. And for now at least, we'll start with them all in the same octave. I'll go with 4 feet. The reason for the octaves are labeled in feet, by the way, goes way back to pipe organs, and that is sort of stuck as a way of labeling octaves, at least with Moog. And I'll turn all the oscillators up equally in the mixer, just to around 9 o'clock. I want them well below the saturation point. There's going to be a lot of added saturation in this patch from the delay, so I want the oscillators to be as clean as possible, at least for now. The VCAs are in amp envelope mode, by the way. Okay, let's hear what we've got. I want to make a pad that swells and fades, so setting long attack and release times on the amp envelope generator. Oh, that's a fairly drastic volume change. I'm going to bring up sustain. There we go. Okay, let's set up the filter now. I'm going to bring the cutoff to about the halfway point. And to get some stereo imaging, I'm going to make the resonance slightly different on each filter. It's in low pass mode, by the way. Okay, before we finish up with the filter, let's switch on multi-trig mode and pay attention to the attack from the VCA. All right, you probably noticed the VCA envelope generator did not re-trigger. So we're going to go on a bit of a tangent here, but this is a behavior with the Matriarch that I'm not crazy about. In multi-trig mode, the envelope generators are supposed to re-trigger each time a new key is pressed, but that's not what seems to be happening, at least with the VCA envelope generator. And unfortunately, even if you patch the envelope out directly into the VCA CV input, the VCA is not fully re-triggered. I've even tried some more complex solutions like this, but to no avail. Anyway, this is a behavior that obviously bothers me. I'd like to be able to fully re-trigger the attack, especially on a pad patch. A bunch of people have emailed me and asked me if I knew a workaround. The answer at this time is no, not without using external modules. Since I'm on the topic, another of the Matriarch's strange behaviors involves the global settings for paraphonic unison and stolen voices. I've had a few people ask me about this as well. It's something I'm going to look into when I have a little bit more time, and I'll put together a video for that when I get the chance. Okay, but let's get back to the VCA and multi-trig for a minute. The quickest and easiest fix is to simply just time the release to the tempo of your tune. So that works fine in this case, but that's not really going to solve anything if you're playing rubato or a more complicated rhythmic pattern. If the release is long, the envelope's not going to fully re-trigger if it hasn't ended its cycle before you hit a new key. But that's not the case with the filter envelope generator. I've just set up a really simple monophonic patch to demonstrate. So again, with multi-trig on, each note's attack should be identical, even if you're holding down a key or the envelope hasn't fully cycled. So I'm holding down a D, but I hit a C, but the envelope re-triggered. So obviously this is working fine. So without multi-trig, the envelope is not going to re-trigger if you're holding down a key. With multi-trig, it should. So this works great with the filter, but it just doesn't seem to work with the VCA, which is a real drag. So with a long attack time like this, the filter is still re-triggering, but the amp envelope is not. I'll get rid of the filter modulation so it's obvious. You hear a little bit of a swell, but it definitely doesn't go all the way down to the 0 point. Okay, done with that tangent. That's something I'm going to look into in the future, like I said. But let's get back to our delay patch. This video's been long enough. Okay, back to 4-voice mode. And I'm going to add in some pulse width modulation using the mod wheel and the mod bay. Let's go with a sine wave and slow down the LFO a little bit just to get a little bit of added movement to the patch. And that sounds nice about there. Okay, the basic patch is set up, so we're going to go full wet with the delay. And I've got spacing and time at their max. Just beautiful. Obviously a big tonal difference, but take a listen to the imaging. Because of the different delay times, we've got a larger stereo field. Let's add some feedback, just to the point of self-oscillation. Yeah, now you can really hear the feedback. It sounds really nice, but I might dial it back just a little bit to get rid of a little bit of that metallic sound. Sweet. Yeah, this patch could be finished now. Love it. Yeah, that's just wonderful, but let's keep going. Okay, first thing we're going to do is bypass the delay, mix at 0, and I'm going to bring back the release time just a tick. Okay, way back in the beginning of this marathon, I talked about the Matriarch's audio path. Remember, the delay is after the VCA, but I'd like to be able to control the release time of this patch with an envelope generator. That won't work as is because, as I mentioned, the delay is after the VCA, so in this case, the release time is actually dependent on the feedback amount. So we need to patch the delay before the VCA, but the problem is there's no VCA outs, so we need to figure out how to deal with that. Okay, so what I'm going to do is patch directly out of the filter outputs into the delay inputs. So in doing this, we've bypassed the VCA, but we've got to remember to keep our mix knob on the delay at 0. Then we take the delay outs from the back of the Matriarch, remember those are full wet, and patch those into the VCA. So now the delay is before the VCA in the audio path. And our amp envelope generator controls the release, regardless of how much feedback is applied. So the filter itself is sort of working as a VCA, well, really more like a makeshift low-pass gate than a VCA. If you really wanted more control or wanted your filter to be at much higher cutoff, you could patch the filter outs to the attenuators and the envelope outs to the CV in on the attenuators so they act like VCAs. But the filter actually does a really good job of being a fake low-pass gate. I'm going to switch into drone mode to demonstrate. Okay, obviously in drone mode, the VCA is wide open, and you can hear that if I lower the cutoff, nothing's getting through to our delay and VCA. So again, sort of a fake low-pass gate. I can modulate the filter manually like I was just doing, or we could use the envelope amount knob on the filter to do that for us. But actually, I want to make sure that's clear. So with the filter down, no audio passes through. With the filter up, it goes into our delay and then ultimately our VCA. And in drone mode, the VCA is open, so let's shut that down again, put it back into amp envelope mode. And I'm not going to use the filter envelope to modulate the filter, so I'm just going to find a starting point for our cutoff. That sounds good there. So again, the amp envelope generator is controlling the VCA post-delay. And at the moment, we have no filter modulation. So let's take care of that. Instead of using the filter envelope, I'm going to use LFOs to modulate the filter. So let's start with the LFO from the mod bay. I'm going to patch that into an attenuator, just to control the level of modulation, and out of the attenuator into the cutoff of filter 1. And I'm going to go into drone mode to dial in my modulation amount. So it's just easy to hear. I don't have to keep pressing keys. I'm going to use the saw wave to modulate the LFO. So it kind of acts like a little repeating AD envelope generator. So we get a nice fast attack and a little rhythmic pulse going. Sounds cool. And I could change the rate of the LFO to coincide with the delay time, but it actually is working out pretty well. So I'll just leave it where it is for now. Okay, let's get the VCA back in the audio path. Cool. Okay, so the LFO is not linked to the keyboard at all, so I'm just timing when I'm hitting the keys in relation to the delay time. But if I wanted more control, I could patch keyboard gate out into the sync in input on the LFO, and it would cause it to re-trigger with each key press, or at least it would be close. It's analog, it's not digital, it's not going to be exact. Okay, just going to make some adjustments to the envelopes. I shortened up the release time a little bit on the amp envelope generator. And I think I'm going to add in more feedback and put the release back to where it was. Cool. Okay, let's get some more filter modulation going. Let's get some stereo filter modulation happening. Remember, right now we're just patching in the cutoff of filter 1, which will affect both filter cutoffs. So I've got the triangle LFO patched into an attenuator into the cutoff of filter 2. And we'll bring in the modulation with the attenuator. Speed up the LFO so we can hear it better. There we go. And now we're going to adjust the spacing so we get a nice balance between the two LFO modulations. So remember, the cutoff knob itself will affect the cutoff of both filters, but the spacing knob controls the cutoff of filter 1 relative to the cutoff knob. So with it counterclockwise, our saw wave modulation has got a lower cutoff. Okay, so our filter envelope generator is doing nothing at the moment. So let's bring a tiny bit of filter modulation in with the keyboard. And raise the sustain just a little bit. Remember, that's just the same thing almost as raising the cutoff knob itself. As long as keys are being held, of course. Yeah, that's okay. I think I liked it better before without the filter envelope modulation, but this would probably sound great as a monosynth bass patch. Spooky. Adjust the LFO rate and try to get a more interesting rhythm between the LFO and the delay. It's alright, it sounds cool, but the rhythm's not really anything to write home about. If I patched out of the back of the Matriarch, the keyboard out into the sync, or even the rate input on the LFO, I would get the LFO to react better with the keyboard. But this is supposed to be a pad, not a bass, so let's get back to that. Okay, so I want something a little more gentle, so let's get rid of this saw wave, switch it over to sine wave. Cool, so we've still got our stereo filter modulation, but it's a little more subtle, sweeping from left to right. Let's just adjust the filter modulation amounts with the attenuators and try to get a nice balance between the sine wave and triangle wave. And I should bring sustain down in the amp envelope generator so the modulation is more prevalent. Almost there, just going to make a couple more adjustments and try to get that balance a little better. between the LFOs. Okay, that's sounding pretty good. We've got, it's again stereo modulation of our filter with 2 LFOs. Again, our VCA is post delay, but the audio path is full wet delay. And we do have a little bit of filter modulation from the filter envelope generator, but let's use it to do a little bit more. So I'm going to grab a patch cable and I'm going to patch out of the envelope and out into the trigger input. So that's now a looping envelope generator or a unipolar LFO. So I'm going to patch out of the envelope generator into an attenuator, and out of the attenuator I'm going to go into a mult. So I'm going to use this to modulate a bunch of different things. So I guess I'll start with modulating the delay time of channel 1, so out of the mult into the CV input for channel 1. So in the demo at the beginning of this video, I did this part slightly differently, but the result would be the same. I had patched the envelope out into the mult, and from there I attenuated it with a passive attenuator before going into the rate input of the LFO. In this version, I skipped that step by attenuating it with the attenuator on the matriarch itself. And you can hear that. That's super cool. I just want a tiny bit so we're not getting drastic pitch changes. So the attenuator's almost at 0. And a little more than that. There we go. Wobbly tape effect almost. Yeah, cool. Oh, you know what I should do? I should patch the keyboard CV aftertouch into the CV control input for that attenuator. But instead, let's try just a subtle modulation, so just modulating channel 2 of the delay. Yeah, I really like that. Try ping pong mode on the delay. Yeah, that's real pretty. There's a lot of modulation in this patch, but it's all very subtle, so it really works well together. The patch is never the same. Okay, but let's go even further. So we're going to go out of the mult and modulate the rate of the sine LFO. And we're going to do the same thing with our triangle LFO. So this is more icing on the cake type stuff, but it's just adding more randomness and evolution to the patch, because the LFO rates are constantly changing. Let's just tinker with the filter and the resonance. Get some swoops in there. Okay, cool. Now, I mentioned aftertouch, so let's get that in there. So I'm going to patch keyboard aftertouch out of the back of the matriarch into this mult. Out of the mult, we're going to go into the CV control inputs for each attenuator, which is controlling the amount of LFO modulation for both of the filters, of course. Now, the harder I press, the more modulation is let through. Okay, and that's the patch. There's a lot of stuff going on in this patch, so that means there's a lot of stuff to experiment and tweak, and oh, that's beautiful. Yeah, so you can mess around with this patch and oh wow. Okay, so delay feedback is the ultimate secret weapon. That's the icing on the cake. With all this filter modulation, you don't notice that bright metallic sound that we were getting before when it was in self-oscillation as much. It's just thickening everything up. Yeah, that's beautiful. Okay, this has been a very long video, and we've barely even scratched the surface of the Matriarch's delay. So I will be putting out at least another 2 videos. Oh, just listen to that, it's killer. Anyway, we'll be putting out at least another 2 videos about the Matriarch's delay, but they're not going to be for a while. So hopefully you've got enough ideas from this video to hold you over for a while and experiment and come up with your own ideas. Thanks very much for watching. I hope you learned something.